Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere warm, quiet, and impossibly ancient, beneath a sky hung with stars that haven't changed in thousands of years. You're barefoot, because everyone is, your toes crunch over packed sand still holding, onto the day's heat. And there's the smell of grain in the air. Nutty, slightly sour, with a hint of something wet and yeasty wafting from big round jars sunk halfway into the earth. Clay vessels, sealed with woven grass and flickering in. Lamplight. This is not your average craft brewery. You're in ancient Nubia, maybe 1,800 years ago. It's dusk, and someone hands you a thick ceramic cup, warm from their hands. You take a sip. It's gritty, a little funky. You're not sure whether to swallow or apologize. But here's the twist. What you just drank is one of the oldest known examples of naturally antibiotic beer on Earth. No joke. You've basically sipped on a prehistoric health tonic, served. Warm, slightly soupy, and most likely unintentionally miraculous. This stuff contains traces of tetracycline, a powerful antibiotic. And yet, the people drinking it had absolutely no clue what bacteria even were. You probably won't survive. This, by the way, not the beer, your modern immune system would cry, but the general life expectancy here hovers somewhere between adult by 13 and dead by 35 unless you're royal. Hope you didn't unpack your skincare routine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love knowing whose bedtime stories I'm crashing. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together. You're sitting outside a Nubian brewing hut, watching smoke curl from a clay chimney and firelight flicker across woven reed walls. A few women work nearby, chatting quietly, bent over wooden troughs. Their hands are elbow-deep in soaked sorghum mash. The air is humid and fragrant, thick with the scent of wet grain and smoldering wood ash. This is beer, yes, but not the fizzy pilsner in your uncle's fridge. This is medicine, ceremony, calorie supply, and comfort drink all in one. Nubians took their beer seriously, probably more seriously than they took a lot of other things. It was woven into nearly every ritual, every meal, and every marginal excuse. For a feast. Not just for Nubians either. Their Egyptian neighbors to the north, who usually got all the fame, also relied on beer as a dietary staple. Wine was for rich scribes and temple scribblers. Beer was for builders, mothers, soldiers, and very often, the sick. You squint at the jar nearest you. It's wide at the middle, narrow at the mouth, and sealed with a thin cover. Someone lifts the lid. The scent is alive. Like someone left. Cereal milk in the sun, but it's somehow not disgusting. Maybe even comforting. And here's the wild part. There's something in that smell your brain doesn't recognize. But your body does. Because inside that slurry of half-fermented grain and open-air magic is a bacterium called streptomyces. It's chilling, living its best life in soggy sorghum. And guess what? It secretes tetracycline, an antibiotic we modern folk didn't discover until 1948. Yet you're sipping it now, 800 years before that date. Accidentally, but still. You're drinking medicine brewed by accident, in clay pots, by people who were trying to make something nourishing, tasty would be optional, but ended up crafting one of the earliest forms of naturally occurring pharmaceutical. Delivery systems in human history. Not bad for a civilization without microscopes, PhDs, or marketing teams. Now, were they aware of this medicinal property? That's a hot debate. We'll get to it. But first, you lean back against the hut wall, feeling the grainy cool of the mudbrick at your back. The beer's settling in your stomach, thick and oddly satisfying. A little girl toddles past you carrying a smaller jar, and you realize everyone drinks this stuff. Not just the adults. Kids, elders, pregnant women. There's no "don't drink" when sick warning label. This is the sick day treatment. In the glow of the fire, the woman beside you pours another round from the fermentation jar. You notice that she's careful. She scoops from the top, leaves the sludgy bottom behind. That's where the grain hulls and the heavier sediment pool. But what's interesting, besides the soft warmth in your gut, is the color of that sludge. It's yellow-green, bright, almost unnatural-looking. If you've ever taken tetracycline capsules, you might recognize the same hue. Ding, ding. But again, no one here says antibiotics. No one says infection-fighting properties. They say good beer. They say strong stomach. They say drink this, it will help. And weirdly, it does. You glance up. The stars are pin-sharp above. There's no light pollution here, just oil lamps and moonlight. The wind rustles through the palm leaves. Someone's laughing near the hearth. Another jar of mash is being stirred by hand. The woman guiding the process, probably the oldest brewer in the group, adds something that looks suspiciously like dried grass. Maybe a grain husk. Maybe something more. You lean closer. She looks at you and winks. You suspect she knows more than she lets on. Historians still argue whether ancient Nubians intentionally cultivated these healing brews or just got lucky with a perfect storm of geography, ingredients, and trial and error wisdom. But right now, as you watch these women work, there's a sense that knowledge isn't always about scientific terminology. Sometimes it's the quiet repetition of methods that work. Over centuries, across generations, until it becomes instinct, not theory. You sip again. The beer's gone slightly sour now. Someone offers a smoked date to chew with it. The sweetness cuts the tang. You nod your thanks. The woman refills your cup, presses it into your hand. And somewhere deep in your microbiome, a colony of bad bacteria prepares to get absolutely wrecked. You wake up with the early sun, not from an alarm clock, but from the gentle, dusty breath of morning air slipping through woven shutters. A donkey brays somewhere far off. The fire pit from last night is now just a circle of ash and half-burned twigs, and that peculiar sour-sweet scent of beer is still hanging in the air, like warm cereal left on a windowsill too long. Comforting, oddly. Not unpleasant. Just present. You stretch your arms over your head, trying not to bump into the person, snoring beside you on the packed dirt floor. Beer makes a surprisingly effective sedative, even if it doesn't come with a warning label or dosage guidelines. Today, you're learning how much this cloudy, grainy stuff matters, not just as a beverage, but as a centerpiece of ancient Nubian life, political, spiritual, economic. You're probably still hungover, but there's no time to dwell. A tall man in a linen tunic is already shouting about tax jars. See, this isn't just beer. It's currency, social glue, divine offering, and taxable property. You follow the commotion to the edge of a sun-baked courtyard where a scribe, yes, an actual stone tablet-carrying bureaucrat, is carefully marking off lines on a small board while counting beer jars stacked in an orderly row. Each one bears a hand-painted symbol, who brewed it, who gets it, and what portion goes to the temple, or the king, or both. Bureaucracy in 100-degree weather, friends. Turns out, beer wasn't just personal, it was divine. The gods were not only thirsty, but picky. Offerings of stale beer, an insult, over-fermented, offensive, and undertaxed? Oh, absolutely illegal. The goddess Tenenit, for example, was the protectress of beer and childbirth. Yes, in that order. And you'd offer up a mug or two if you wanted things to go smoothly in either area. You'd also better not spill any on sacred ground. Unless you wanted a priest to scold you with something that sounded spiritual, but was probably just beer guilt. You squat beside a woman who's arranging fresh beer jars. She's chalking symbols. On each one has a picture of what looks like a stick man with a crown, royal batch. Another has a snake symbol, That one's going to the healing temple, and one just says simply, for ceremony, which could mean anything from a funeral to a midsummer dance party. Historians still debate just how formalized this distribution system was. Some say Nubians had a precise beer tax quota depending on your harvest yield. Others argue it was more like an honor system. Donate to the temple or risk bad luck and side-eye from your neighbors. Either way, you're definitely contributing. They hand you a small jar and nod meaningfully. You carry it 2 steps before nearly dropping it on your foot. Clay is heavier than it looks and there's no handle. The sun climbs higher and a group of younger boys start lining up to fetch beer for their families. You watch as a thin boy with dust-caked legs trades a small basket of grain for a steaming mug. He doesn't drink it. He sprints back toward a narrow alley between 2 houses. Lunch delivery, 4th century style. Beer here is served at room temperature, or warmer. There's no refrigeration. But that's not a problem. It's not just for refreshment, it's for calories. This isn't a luxury, this is survival. Grain fermented into a slightly alcoholic porridge means long-lasting food, safe hydration, and just enough buzz to ignore your sore joints. And the gods? They're everywhere. Shrines near the beer-making huts, miniature altars beside the fermentation, pots and even tiny goddess figurines tucked into storage shelves. One is carved from bone, her face half-worn smooth from being handled so often. You pick her up gently. The woman beside you nods. She blesses the foam, she says, or something like that. You don't speak Old Nubian, but the intent is clear. Later, someone brings out a different jar, narrower, with a lid sealed tightly by woven reeds and hardened mud. It's reserved for special occasions, a wedding, a new child, or maybe the high priest just wants a top-shelf sip. The contents smell sweeter, more carefully brewed. The bubbles are finer. It has the air of something aged. You sip, and wow, it's still thick, still gritty, but it tastes smoother, gentler. There's a faint herbal note you can't quite place. And again, that signature yellow hue, just a little more vibrant. Not glowing, but definitely unnatural by modern standards. They don't know what tetracycline is, but they know this batch is better. They know it works for upset stomachs, for fevers, for mysterious afflictions no one can name, but everyone has seen. And they know not to waste it. A drop spilled is a drop mourned. This one is poured with reverence. Even laughter here pauses slightly as it's ladled out. Modern researchers estimate the tetracycline content in some of these jars was high enough to affect real healing. X-rays of mummies later showed dense antibiotic lines in their bones. People weren't just drinking it, they were marinating in it for years, probably their whole lives. Accident or not, the result was the same. Low-grade daily dose antibiotics built right into their food. You crouch beside an elderly brewer who gestures toward the stacked jars. She speaks softly. You catch only fragments, but the tone is reverent. She touches her chest, her stomach, her knees, then points to the beer. You understand? It helps. As the day stretches, the beer keeps flowing. It's too precious to hoard, too central to every moment. From taxes to temple rites, from healing wounds to easing grief, it's there. Gritty, golden, gently effervescent, a kind of ancient balm. You wonder, not for the first time, if the knowledge is truly lost or just sleeping in the shadows of our science. You're back at the brewery, if you can call it that. It's more like an open-air kitchen married to a chemistry lab with fewer safety regulations and way more smoke. Today is all about ingredients. You crouch in the dirt beside a basket of grain. Sorghum, mostly. Its sharp, earthy smell clinging to your fingers when you touch it. It's dry, brown-red, and every kernel is alive with the potential to turn into beer, or porridge, or an offering to whatever god is currently responsible for preventing plagues. Sorghum's the star of the show. It grows like it means it, especially in the dry, sun-beaten fields of ancient Nubia. Unlike barley or wheat, which sulk in desert climates, sorghum stands tall, waving gently in the wind like it's confident in its destiny to ferment. A younger brewer, barefoot and proud, shows you how they crack the grains with a heavy stone and soak them in wide, shallow baskets. There's no measuring, no timers. It's all feel. Hands dipped, sniffed, stirred. You start to notice the smell shifting, almost like bread dough with a twist of pickled something. That's the fermentation beginning to whisper. Yeast is here. Now, even if no one's using the word, it's floating invisibly in the air, settling like polite ghosts into every wooden bowl, every groove in the clay jars. No one invited them. They just arrive. You look closer at the bubbling mash. It's alive. Not aggressively so, more like a slow exhale. And just like that, you're part of a fermentation process that will, in a few days, become beer potent enough to kill off certain bacteria. Accidentally medicinal. Unintentionally revolutionary. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Historians still argue whether Nubians knew their beer had healing properties or simply noticed that people stopped dying of infections when they drank it. One camp insists they must have known. You don't brew the same way for centuries without figuring out what works. The other side insists, no, this was a microbial miracle, pure accident, like bread dough left too long on a sunny windowsill. One side says science, the other says survival luck. Either way, you're elbow deep in damp sorghum mash now, and a curious yellow fuzz is starting to bloom around the edges. Not mold exactly, more like a powder. Bright, almost gold. You raise an eyebrow. The brewer nods. She doesn't explain it, but she doesn't scrape it off either. That fuzz might just be streptomyces, the bacteria that produce tetracycline. Your new favorite uninvited guest. You break for a late morning snack. It's not much. Some dried dates, a smear of cheese, and of course a small bowl of beer thick enough to eat with a spoon. It's warm, slightly sour. You sip slowly. There's something weirdly energizing about it, as if the yeast itself is still doing its job in your gut. While you chew, you take a good look at the tools around you. Everything here looks handmade, and it is. But there's precision in the wear patterns. Pots blackened from 100 fires, stirring paddles smoothed by generations of hands. Even the beer sieves, made of woven reeds, are patched and reinforced, with care. A researcher would call this low-tech. But you're starting to suspect it's not low-tech. It's deep tech. The kind that's been layered slowly over lifetimes, tested by memory, not measurement. Nothing is written down, but everything is known. That night, someone brings out a particularly old brewing jar, the kind passed down like an heirloom with its own personality. It's scratched, stained, and slightly cracked, but still in use. You ask why. The brewer points to a set of marks near the base, indentations you hadn't noticed before. She presses her fingers to them. Tap, tap, tap. Good brew, she says in her language. You don't need a translator to understand. You're starting to realize that fermentation in Nubia is sacred. It's not a side activity. It's a cornerstone. You might live without meat. You might skip vegetables half the year. But beer? Beer is non-negotiable. Without it, your body misses its daily hydration. Your soul misses its ritual. Your gut misses its antibiotic cocktail. Later, as the mash is transferred into fermentation jars, you help smear a bit of wet clay around the rims to seal them. Not airtight, just enough to keep flies and dust out. The jars are buried halfway in the earth to keep them cool. That's the ancient version of a fridge. No electricity needed, just mud and intuition. You notice a teenage boy drawing symbols onto a fresh jar with a stick of charcoal. It's not elaborate, just a few lines. But it means something. Brew strength? Batch date? You ask, but he shrugs. Grandmother knows, he says. You glance at the elderly brewer in the corner. She gives you a look that could mean either obviously or don't ask again. Later, you peek into the community shrine. It's tiny, built from the same reddish mud brick as everything else, shaded by woven palm leaf awnings. Inside are small clay figures, smooth from centuries of worship. One holds a bowl, another holds a bundle of grain. You recognize the ingredients, the tools, the stories. A fresh beer jar rests on the altar, foam crusted at the edge. A thanks or a plea, or both. Outside, the sun dips lower. Someone begins to sing, a work song, rhythmic and low. It weaves through the courtyard as more jars are prepped. The smell of yeast and wet grain thickens in the cooling air. You breathe in. This is what health smells like. It doesn't come in capsules or have a brand name. It comes in clay, stirred by hand, blessed with sun, and wrapped in ritual. Your hands are sticky from wet grain and your knees are sore from crouching, but you're finally getting the hang of this ancient brewing gig. Sort of. Today, you're learning the choreography. Every stir, every pour, every muttered blessing. That turns gritty grain and water into something transcendent, or at least non-toxic. Welcome to the Nubian brewing lesson you didn't know you needed. The process doesn't involve thermometers or pH strips or lab coats. It's all rhythm, memory. The way the mash feels between your fingers. The exact sound of the bubbling when it's just right. And of course, the 1,000-yard stare of the grandmother overseeing you, her arms crossed, her expression hovering somewhere between amusement and preemptive disappointment. You're watching the main mash cool now, spread in wide clay basins. The sun does most of the work. The mixture is thick, more porridge than punch, and swirls lazily when stirred with a wide wooden paddle. You're told not to overdo it. Stir too much, and the fermentation gets agitated. Stir too little, and it settles funny. You nod solemnly like this makes sense. An older woman offers you a sip from a ladle. It's warm, half fermented, and makes your eyebrows twitch. You try not to cough. She grins, then tosses the rest to the ground with a not ready grunt. Next step is the filtering. If you thought modern homebrew had a DIY vibe, this takes it further. Reeds woven into loose mats act as strainers, separating the mash from the liquid that'll become beer. It's slow, messy. The liquid drips, oozes, and sometimes dribbles off in the wrong direction. A child tries to help by stepping directly onto the mat, earning a swift scolding and a cloud of grain dust. Filtered beer is collected in jugs sealed with fabric and clay. Some batches are flavored, not with hops. Those are centuries and continents away, but with herbs, maybe fenugreek, maybe something local and pungent that smells like grass and old honey. You can't quite tell. The flavors vary by season, by brewer, by mood. You suspect more than one argument has been had over a too-bitter spring batch. While the jars ferment, the brewers gather for a break. You sit in the circle, sore and sun-warmed. One woman tells a story, something about a crocodile and a clever child who fooled it using a bowl of beer. The moral is lost on you, but the laughter is infectious. They pass around a cup of a nearly finished batch. The foam clings to the edge like tired soap. You take a sip. Better. Still earthy. Still thick. But the bite is gentler. You can feel the fizz on your tongue, the hint of something sour but satisfying. The woman beside you nods in approval. You've passed a small test. Now here's something odd. There's no yeast packet in sight, no fancy bottle with the word fermentation. Starter. The yeast just lives here, in the bowls, on the grain, in the air. It's an invisible roommate, and it's loyal. Brewing jars passed down through families aren't just sentimental, they're microbially seasoned. The inner walls of those clay jars are home to colonies of yeast and bacteria that return, batch after batch, to do their work. Some jars are legendary. One, you're told, belonged to a brewer who could cure fevers with her beer alone. She died 50 years ago. The jar remains. You get to see it, blackened with use, its rim chipped but still intact. A small pattern is etched near the base. Someone's fingers trace it as if invoking her memory. Historians still argue whether this kind of knowledge was scientific, spiritual, or something in between. Was it trial and error brilliance? A sacred instinct? A microbial fluke turned family? Tradition? They may never agree. But right now, the results speak louder than any scroll. You're invited to help with the next batch. The fire pit is hot, glowing red, and you lift a heavy pot filled with fresh mash. It's heavier than expected, and you nearly tip it. The older woman catches it with one hand and gives you the kind of look that says, "You are very lucky I believe in forgiveness." The pot is lowered into a ring of stones and left to simmer. The heat changes the mash, deepens it. You smell sugar, malt, the promise of something complex. No timers, no instructions. Just patience. You sneak off while it cooks and peek into a smaller room behind the brewing area. It's darker, quieter. Here are the storage jars. Dozens of them, in tight rows, half sunk into the earth. Their surfaces are marked, chalk, paint, even cut in grooves. Some are smeared with what looks like dry herbs. This is not just storage, it's a system. And here's a strange little detail. One of the older jars has a string of shells tied around its neck. Decorative, protective, you can't tell. The brewer who walks in behind you just says, "It keeps the batch calm." You decide not to question it. In the corner, a jar bubbles slightly. You kneel to inspect it. The foam is tinged yellow, brighter than the rest. That's your tetracycline again, floating just under the radar, like a secret handshake between the ancient world and modern medicine. The surface shimmers faintly in the lamplight. You don't touch it. You just sit and breathe. There's something comforting about the quiet consistency here, the rituals, the repetition. Every family has their own version, every elder their own trick, and yet somehow the results converge. Beer that sustains, heals, celebrates, mourns, and connects through flavor, through feeling, and, just maybe, through fermentation-fueled pharmacology. As the sun sets, the beer for tomorrow is already beginning to think about itself. You close your eyes for a moment. The air is thick with steam, smoke, and a whisper of yeast. You've learned the recipe. But the real secret? That's still in the hands of those who stir with both memory and magic. The next morning begins with the smell of smoke and damp grain clinging to your clothes like a second skin. You wake where you fell asleep, curled beside a still warm fermentation jar, your arm resting against the cool rim. You don't remember lying down. You definitely don't remember someone covering you with a woven blanket. But here you are, dreaming of foam and clay and a voice chanting softly over a cup of beer. It's not just breakfast time, it's offering time. You shuffle into the main courtyard where several jars are lined up in a careful crescent. The brewers are already awake, alert, precise. A small shrine has been assembled from clay bricks and smooth river stones, crowned with a figurine shaped like a woman cradling a bowl. That's Tenanit again, the goddess of beer or childbirth or both, depending on the mood of the day and the translation. You're handed a ladle. This feels like a test. The beer inside the jar is darker now and it smells like wood smoke, herbs, and faintly lemony? Maybe that's the sorghum. Maybe it's divine intervention. Either way, it's strong. You ladle out a scoop and carefully pour it over the base of the shrine. The foam puddles around the clay feet of the goddess and begins to bubble faintly in the heat. One by one, others follow. No one speaks. The only sound is the gentle swish of liquid, the faint pop of fermentation still breathing inside the jars. And just like that, you've helped offer antibiotic beer to a literal deity. Casual. But it's not all incense and solemn silence. Once the goddess has had her sip, and she always gets the first, everyone else digs in. You find yourself seated in a circle, cradling a bowl of the same beer you just watched bubble at a shrine. No one finds that weird. That's the thing. Divinity. And daily life aren't separated here. They're blended, like herbs in a mash, like bacteria in clay. And oh, it's not just breakfast. There's flatbread too, made from the same grains used in the brewing process. You tear off a piece, dip it into the foam. The result is chewy. Like if sourdough had a buzz and a bit of an attitude. Surprisingly good, especially with the sweet date paste they smear on top. As you eat, the elders talk. Not to you exactly, but around you. You learn that beer accompanies most life events, births, deaths, marriages, disputes. It's the glue that binds everything together. Even when there's nothing to celebrate, you can always drink for the ancestors, which is a bit like raising a glass to grandma. But if grandma were also expected to intervene in your dental health. One of the older women begins to sing softly, a call and response song, low and looping. It's about brewing, or maybe healing. The melody is simple, easy to pick up. You hum along. The rhythm becomes hypnotic, like the heartbeat of the courtyard itself. Suddenly, someone begins ladling beer into smaller jars, sealing them with fresh reeds. You ask what they're for. A young man replies, "Deliveries. To the sick, to the temples, to the ones who can't brew for themselves." You offer to help, and soon you're balancing 2 jars on a wooden carrying board, following a narrow path, out of the compound and into the village beyond. First stop, a low windowless house with a woven door curtain. Inside, a woman lies curled on a mat, her face damp, her forehead streaked with something herbal. You leave the jar just inside the threshold, and an older woman bows slightly in thanks. Second stop, a small temple. No statues, just murals painted in thick red ochre on the walls. You place the beer beside a cluster of offerings, bread, herbs, a bird feather tied with string. The priest doesn't say anything. He just nods. Last stop, a lonely old man sitting under a tree. He gestures to a shallow cut on his leg, swollen and pink. You're no doctor, but it doesn't look great. He takes the beer and drinks deeply, smacking his lips after. Then he pats the jar and says something that sounds like, "Itch no more." You believe him. Back at the compound, another batch is already in motion. The mash from yesterday is now frothy and pungent. A few of the women wrinkle their noses. One shrugs. "Funky batch," she says, before sealing it with extra reeds. You're curious. Does funky mean bad, strong, healing, poisonous? Historians still argue what these smell. Cues meant to ancient brewers. Some suggest they knew which batches were stronger based on scent alone. Others think they brewed everything and figured it out the hard way. One thing's certain, nothing gets wasted. You're shown a row of smaller vessels, half jars really, used for leftover slurries, experimental blends, or lower alcohol brews. For children. Yep, children. You sip one. It's more porridge than pint. Not unpleasant, just functional. Thick, tangy, slightly sweet. A little like watery oatmeal that got left out during a family reunion. Then comes the funeral brew. Someone has passed. A quiet ripple moves through the compound. No wailing, just focused movement. Jars are cleaned. Special herbs are added. A specific song is hummed. One you haven't heard before. The brew is poured into long, narrow jars and carried to a stone. Platform by the river. There's no embalming here, just prayers, silence, and a shared drink. Everyone sips, even the children, even you. The beer is stronger, sharper. It tastes like goodbye, and it's healing, not just in the tetracycline sense. In the way that gathering, remembering, and drinking together stitches a small part of the world back into place. The sun is setting again. The beer jars are cooling in their shaded pits. You sit with your back against one, the clay cool and reassuring. The woman who taught you how to stir mash correctly, on the third try, leans beside you and says, "You learn fast." You think she's just being polite, but maybe not. You're waking up to the smell of something sour, sharp, tangy, and thick with humidity. It's not unpleasant, just bold. One of the beer jars has gone off, or rather, it's gone somewhere new. You can tell from the expression of the elder, woman crouched beside it. Not alarmed, not thrilled, just curious. She lifts the lid, gives a slow sniff, and then grunts a sound somewhere between "huh" and "interesting." Welcome to the unpredictable world of microbial miracles. The jar is passed around. Everyone sniffs it like it's a mysterious flower. You do too. It smells, how to put this, like spicy sourdough mixed with a hint of unwashed laundry. Definitely. Not the breakfast blend, but no one dumps it out. In fact, it's earmarked for someone with a festering cut on their arm, which you weren't emotionally prepared to witness before lunch. But here we are. A boy appears, maybe 10 or 11, with his arm bound in a crude cloth wrap. He's not crying, but he looks pale. The cloth is removed. You flinch. Yep, that's an infection. Swollen, angry, the skin around it hot and shiny. One of the women hums something softly, then pours a ladle of the beer, not into a cup, but onto a piece of cloth, which she then presses gently to the wound. Beer as wound care. Because antibiotics haven't been invented yet, or so we thought. What's fascinating is that the beer doesn't just disinfect in theory. In modern times, when scientists examined bones from ancient Nubian cemeteries using X-rays, they found something extraordinary. Distinct fluorescent lines in the bones. Lines that match those caused by long-term exposure to tetracycline. Not from pills, from the beer. Historians still debate how much the Nubians understood about this. Did they know it was healing? Or did they simply observe that this batch, this smell, this foam, helped more than others? One prevailing theory suggests that contaminated grain with mold, wasn't always seen as spoiled. In fact, it was often prized for its strength. In modern terms, that's streptomyces. Bacteria doing its thing, living on the grain, metabolizing and excreting the precious antibiotic compound. But here, it's just a funkier batch with better results. You watch as the woman dips the cloth again. The boy doesn't flinch. He's seen this before. Maybe even lived through worse. The sour-smelling beer is set aside in a jar marked with extra reeds, a kind of warning label, or perhaps an endorsement. Either way, it won't be mixed with the everyday batch. This one's for healing. Later, you're shown a corner of the storage room where problem beers live. Not all are bad. Some are just weird. Some ferment too fast. Some don't ferment at all. A few look like soup. One smells like mushrooms and wet leather, which sounds like a bad cologne but might actually help with parasites. Maybe. You're beginning to understand that this wasn't just beer. It was a living pharmacy. Back outside, you join the elders for a quiet moment under the acacia tree. A pot is opened. Inside is a thicker version of the sour batch. They call it resting beer. It's used for fevers, for long illnesses, for old wounds that never quite healed. You sip it, just a little. The flavor is intense, almost meaty, not pleasant, but oddly compelling. You feel it spread across your tongue like a memory. Bitter, tangy, with a hint of clay, and it's doing something. You don't know what. But your stomach gurgles in response. Something shifts. You notice something else, too. The woman who handed it to you has a long scar across her cheek. Faint, but visible. She catches your glance and taps it, gently. Then she gestures to the jar. "That one," she says. You nod. The evidence isn't always in the scrolls. Sometimes it's in the skin, the bones. the slow, careful practices passed down without anyone needing to write them down. Later that day, you're asked to carry one of the healing jars to a nearby settlement. You walk through the dry landscape, past date palms and sleeping goats, the jar snug in a cloth sling across your back. When you arrive, an elderly man greets you with a toothless grin. His leg is bandaged. He points to it, then to the jar. You hand it over. He pours a little into a bowl, dips a cloth, and presses it to the bandage. Then he drinks the rest. You sit with him, quiet. The sun is setting. The bowl is empty. He leans back, exhales slowly. Peaceful. The next morning you return. He's still there, sitting in the same spot. This time smiling wider, he points to his leg, then gives you a thumbs up, or the ancient Nubian equivalent. Maybe it wasn't just luck. Back at the compound, the fermenting jars bubble with a new batch. You're invited to taste. This one's lighter, crisper, meant for ceremony, not medicine. You nod in approval, but you can't stop thinking about that sour jar. The one no one questioned. The one that healed. It wasn't a mistake. It was tradition. Observed, repeated, refined. The woman who made it pats your hand. You're learning, she says. You believe her. Night falls over the Nubian sands. But tonight isn't about brewers or bandages. Tonight we're traveling forward, way forward. Past the kingdoms, past the pyramids, past the great silences of forgotten reigns. You blink, and suddenly you're standing under fluorescent lighting. A lab coat brushes your elbow. A low mechanical hum buzzes in the air. You're not in Nubia anymore. You're in a 20th century laboratory, and the scientists here are about to make a discovery so bizarre, it sounds like science fiction. Bones. That's what they're looking at. Ancient ones. Specifically, the remains of Nubian mummies excavated in the 1960s from burial sites along the Nile. The bones are dry, brittle, silent as stone, and yet somehow still whispering secrets. You lean closer. A technician slides one under an X-ray scanner. There's a pause, then a soft gasp. There, glowing like ghostly threadwork, are thin greenish lines running through the bones. Not cracks, not decorations. Something else. Something that fluoresces under ultraviolet light. Something that shouldn't be there. Tetracycline. Yes, the same antibiotic we didn't discover until 1948. Historians still debate how it got there. Some believe it was a complete accident, contaminated grain fermented just right. Others argue the Nubians knew what they were doing, even if they didn't call it medicine. After all, these weren't trace amounts. This was regular, long-term exposure, enough to leave a visible signature inside the skeleton. Enough to suggest lifetime spent consuming low doses of a healing compound. You lean back in your time-traveling observer chair and try to wrap your head around it. They were brewing antibiotics before antibiotics had a name. The researchers in the lab double-check, triple-check. There's no doubt. They test more samples. Dozens. The pattern repeats. Adult bones, children's bones, even infants. The antibiotic is there, like a ghost hiding in the marrow, unbothered by time. Meanwhile, modern medicine is having a minor identity crisis. Because this isn't supposed to happen. Ancient people aren't supposed to outpace us in pharmaceutical innovation. And yet, here we are. The X-rays are passed around. More testing follows. The findings are eventually published. The academic world hums with cautious disbelief. Anthropologists nod thoughtfully. Microbiologists furrow their brows. And beer lovers everywhere raise an eyebrow. Could it be? Was ancient beer not just a nutritional staple, but a consistent, low-dose antibiotic? You're now imagining a dusty clay jar labeled, "Drink this, it'll fix your toothache," which in some way might not be far from the truth. The implications stretch wide. If Nubians could unknowingly incorporate streptomyces into their beer, What else did ancient cultures discover through the careful observation of what worked and what didn't? Trial and error pharmacology. Wisdom earned the hard way. Sighed. Effects judged by survival. And it wasn't just in Nubia. Later studies found traces of similar antibiotic exposure in Egyptian and even Greco-Roman remains, though none quite so consistent. Nubia stood out, a golden pocket of accidental medicinal mastery, hiding in the shadow of the pyramids. You're back in the lab. A scientist gently lifts another skull, fingers gloved and reverent. Imagine, he says, mostly to himself, if we'd learned from them instead of assuming we invented everything. You nod, though he can't see you. Outside the lab, a debate begins. Was this widespread knowledge, or limited to one region, one community, one clever brewer with a habit of not cleaning her jars too thoroughly? One fringe theory even suggests intentional cultivation, that certain moldy grains were preferred, that these brewers observed faster, healing, fewer infections, longer recoveries, and simply kept doing what worked. Another theory proposes it was about flavor, that the sourness, the brightness of color, even the feel of the foam guided them. That taste itself became a tool for survival. Flavor as pharmacy. You think back to the woman who handed you the sour-smelling brew with a nod. She didn't need a microscope to know it helped. The lab slowly quiets. Another day of testing ends. The bones return to their drawers. Their stories already spilled. You step back outside, into night again, but not the modern city. You're back, in Nubia. The stars overhead are crisp and eternal. The wind carries the scent of ash and yeast, and somewhere nearby, a jar bubbles gently in the sand. You know now what it's doing. It's becoming medicine, not because someone patented it, not because it was designed, but because someone long ago noticed, this one helps, and they kept brewing it. You return to your sleeping mat and lie back. The air is warm. Your skin itches faintly from the day's work, but your limbs feel heavy in that good end-of-the-day way. Someone's humming a lullaby in the next hut. The sound floats, blends with the distant plop of fermentation bubbles, and somewhere deep in your bones, just like those old Nubians, something begins to settle, heal, glow, even if you didn't know the word for it. Morning comes slowly, the Nile's golden light leaking through woven blinds and slipping across your face. Your muscles ache pleasantly from yesterday's brew work, and your head still hums with the memory of fermentation. Today, you'll meet the microscopic architects behind it all, Streptomyces, the bacteria that turned accidental beer into ancestral medicine. No flashy petri dishes or Bunsen burners, though. You're back in the brewery. A woman places a shallow clay tray of top-set mash before you. Patchy, yellow-speckled, and oddly mesmerizing. Up close, it's like a dusty sunrise trapped in porridge, and it smells earthy, like wet hay after rain. You don't see it, she says, pointing, but it's here. Historians still argue whether Nubians understood the connection between smell, color, and healing. Some say they had an intuitive system. Get a particular shade and aroma, and you get a particular batch. Others believe it was random luck, that microbial contamination didn't always align with medicinal benefit. You lean in, mindful of the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Imagine tiny spores migrating on the wind, settling into the mash, quietly multiplying. Their brilliance wasn't visible, but their effect was tangible. Stronger brews, fewer infections, better survival rates. Maybe mothers said, use this. One on sores and fevers, without knowing why, just because it worked. Sorghum, dry and protein-rich, was the ideal stage. It held moisture, allowed Streptomyces to thrive, and had just enough natural sugars to fuel microbial life. Not barley, not wheat. Sorghum, a desert-adapted grain that knew this stage better than anyone. It's like nature handed Nubians a perfect recipe without writing a single line. Later, you help move a pile of empty jars. In some, there are tall reeds. In others, tiny gourds and small twigs sealed inside. Decorations? Hardly. Those additions likely created micro-environments, tiny pockets where particular bacterial strains thrived. A form of early microbial engineering, minus the microscopes. Historians still argue whether this was accidental or intentional. Archaeologists found jars with ornate microbe sanctuaries, reed bundles whose only purpose was to feed microbes. That doesn't feel accidental. Yet the jars are centuries old, and oral tradition rarely calls out bacteria by name. You take a sip from a ceremonial jar. It's sweet, smooth, even joyful. A stark contrast to yesterday's therapeutic batch. The brewer smiles. For the festival, she says, meaning celebration, health, or both. With every taste, you taste ceremony, medicine, and lifeblood. That evening, you collapse beside a cooling fermentation pit. The breeze carries distant laughter and the sound of paddles swishing beside thick mash. It all feels natural, inevitable. Jar after jar, generation after generation, each one a whisper in a long conversation between people and microbes. And somehow, without knowing how, without naming it, Nubians were steering microbial life with senses, with ritual, with memory. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of their legacy in your gut and bones, and wonder what else humanity has overlooked, simply because we lacked words for what we already knew. You wake to that signature calm, breathable air, bird song that flutters without urgency, and the slow morning hush of waking into purpose. Today, the brewing takes a back seat. You're going deeper into the communal heart, storytelling, gossip, and yes, scholarly whispering. The kind that fills empty rooms with a hum of theories and opinions. You gather on woven mats in a shaded courtyard. The elder brewers settle beside you, stoic in their brightly dyed robes. The younger ones drift, in, carrying incense bowls and fans, as the breeze meanders through the space, cooling and fragrant. A hush settles. It's story time. A slender woman flushes when she begins, not a cautionary tale. Instead, she recites a flavor test that ended in triumph. My father's leg vanished the swelling by the end of the season. Another pipes up. My sister's cut healed overnight. Is it vulgar, this talk of puss, bandages, and bacterial death? Uncomfortably intimate for morning light? But it's real life. No potions. Just beans, barley, oops, sorghum, bacteria, and collective memory honed through trial and error. Historians still argue whether these are embellished folk tales shaped to fit cultural narratives or accurate remembrances of infectious miracles. You sip tea, nodding, and notice your fingers tremble slightly. You've been handed a story about a father who was near death. The emotions settle like sediment in a jar. Stories are medicine too, you recognize. A scholar types on a modern laptop. Yes, half the group is present-day researchers, invited to record, document, observe. They scribble notes, record audio, lean in. There's reverence, not critique. They know they're standing before generations of empirical observation. That's something few labs can claim. One researcher clears his throat. We can't prove intention, but the patterns. He trails off, perhaps sensing the moment. That's where the debate cuts deep. Intention or accident, science or folk medicine. But the women around shake their heads. We appreciate it, they say. We divide strong from light. It helps children. It helps pain. No condemnation of failure. No scientisty smugness. Just acceptance. The jar is more generous than many rulers. You feel connected across epochs, through smell, sound, shared purpose. The subtle crack of jars on mudbrick, the laughter, the tears. You remember that scene in your grandmother's kitchen when she discovered that fiery wild onion cure for a rhino-sized toothache. No doctors, just intuition. Intention doesn't need explanation when something works. Meanwhile, scholars still argue whether the antibiotic effect was universally protective or if over time it led to microbial resistance in ancient Nubia. Long-term use of tetracycline desperately garners mixed interpretations. Some say yes, others say no. It doesn't feel theoretical. It feels like grocery shopping, necessary, ongoing, essential. You're handed a small cup of festival brew, floral, light, celebratory. You set it to your lips and taste the interweaving narratives, the grandmothers and the microbes, the tomb excavators and the dabblers. You swallow slowly, letting it settle. Someone begins humming again, a weaving melody that matches the day's rhythm. The laptop hums off, the audio recorder clicks, and the sun dips just enough to cast a single diagonal shaft across the courtyard. In that moment, boundaries blur. Between bourbon-sipping modern addict and harvest-time healer. Between lab report and mother's hymn. You lean back, take a breath, and marvel at the way knowledge travels. Not always in scribbles and hieroglyphs, sometimes in the weight of words passed to sit beside your bones, and sometimes in antibiotic beer that you still can't actually buy in stores. When you finally rise, you realize you're walking back to the brewing area in your own steps. You're not carrying a jar. You're carrying something else. A story, a question, a belief that maybe wisdom is messy, sometimes stinky, sometimes bitter, and maybe that's the sign of something real. Living, memory beating in your chest. You wake to bird song, but there's something different today. A rhythmic clatter on wooden wheels and distant laughter carrying over the fields. You step outside to see a caravan of donkeys, each wearing a woven basket saddle, the baskets heavy, with jars of beer. You're about to embark on your first expedition, the Nubian beer pipeline to Egypt. Yeah, that's right, a conveyance of antibiotic beer flowing northward. The leader, a burly merchant named Amenhotep, grins at you from atop a donkey that looks like it slept in a cereal bowl. He's trading jokes and gesturing toward the loaded donkeys. "To Thebes," he says, voice booming in the morning sun. That's modern Luxor, but in your head, you hear big city, bigger markets, bigger cures. You want to say, you learned to ride before puberty, but instead you scramble onto an empty donkey beside his. This is trade, my friend. It's economic lifeblood. Nubian beer isn't just vital locally, it's in demand up in Egypt, where people pay in grain, cloth, gold even, for a jar that doesn't just quench thirst, it wards off infections. Historically, beer was prized currency in Egypt. It was distributed to builders of the pyramids, rations for soldiers, and offerings to gods. Nubian beer carried that reputation too, maybe even more so, thanks to its secret antibiotic content. Historians still argue how widespread these trade routes were and whether they moved more beer or more people of the beer. But today you're on one of those jar-filled paths. A light breeze follows the caravan as you cross shifting sands and date palm groves. On your right, the Nile flows with lazy grace, but you're more focused on the jar knocking gently against the donkey saddle in front of you. It's sealed, heavy, sacred. You feel the weight of potential healing more than the weight of broken pottery. By midday, you've reached a small Egyptian outpost, just a cluster of mud-brick buildings by the riverside. The local traders greet you with cautious optimism. The jars are exchanged. Nubian beer for barley, fish, coarse linen. Formal tax scribes record the trades in stylus-scratched clay tablets. Efficiency and bureaucracy under one blazing sun. You notice the Egyptian jars are narrower, fancier, adorned with hieroglyphics for deities like Hathor and Osiris. But your Nubian jars carry their own modest decoration, strips of reed and jarred mud sealing, symbol of microbial power. It's not about decoration, it's about function. By evening, you're traveling again, on and on, north toward Thebes. As sand turns to fertile banks, the caravan path widens, picks up donkey tracks, footpaths, and eventually the paved stones of a road leading into the city. "Welcome to Pulsing Heart," Amenhotep says, sounding proud. You squirm atop your donkey. This place is nothing like Nubia's quiet villages. The population, the noise, the smells, it's a sensory overload. But there's a grainy undercurrent. Demand for your beer. People are already making trade offers as soon as they glimpse the jars. At a marketplace near the Nile's edge, traders beckon. You lower the lid on your jar and a local brewer sniffs it deeply. He nods appreciatively. "Medicine," he murmurs. He pays in fine barley and maybe something richer. Palm wine, a carved wooden bowl. You hand over the jar and feel that familiar tingle of purpose. A spotty argument breaks out right beside you. Egyptian and Nubian traders debating which batch contains more potency. Historians still argue if Tatya Yarsa, the legendary antimicrobial brew, was more myth than reality. But here, under the hot sun, its reputation sparkles like glass. With coins clinking and jars traded, you're offered a bowl of Egyptian beer, non-Nubian. It's crisp, filtered, maybe even cold, but you're not interested. You sip politely, and your tongue barely registers sweetness. It's clean but neutral. No grit, no medical kick, no microbial memory in your bones. You hand it back. "Not today," you shrug. Everyone understands. That night, you sleep in a crowded caravanserai where camels bray and merchants haggle until near dawn. But you don't mind. There's a hum of activity, convenience, and chaos woven together. Someone offers a second steaming mug of Nubian beer, still warm, still transformative. You sip and inhale the blend of dust, broth, grain, memory, and, again, that spike of healing in your gut. Stories begin to travel among the travelers. Some people report fewer infections, quicker healing, calmer stomachs. Egyptians taking jars home as insurance. One makes the claim that after drinking Nubian beer, his camel's sore shoulder healed. Quirky? Yes. Possibly mythical? Also yes. Historians still debate when pharmaceuticals became commercial products, but here and now, in this caravanserai, the anecdote circles like incense smoke. Back at the market, a priest of Hathor stops you. He's interested. Maybe he wants a jar for his temple rituals. You pour a meager offering around a small shrine, a gesture of mutual respect. He blesses the jars and nods. It's a cultural handshake. Trade done, jars nearly depleted, you begin the return journey south. The caravan creaks to life again at first light. On the packed donkeys, empty jars rattle like teeth, but those jars are empty, not worthless. They'll be shipped back for refilling. It's a cycle, a lifeline spanning kingdoms. Beer, medicine, trade, diplomacy, woven in clay and straw and the grind of travel. As you ride past Nubia again, you feel that tether. The Nile's curves, the villages, the smell of freshly churned brew. You realize that this pipeline isn't just jars rolling north. It's ideas, it's bacterial packets, it's cultural exchange in liquid form. You return to the brewing compound. At dusk, snapping back into the rhythm of fermentation and ritual. The jars you brought back are cracked but full of future. Last night's story accompanied them. Jar trade is over, but impact lingers. And you, dusty from the road but richer in purpose, know you're not just a brewer now. You're an ambassador of this ancient pharmacy. You settle into a familiar space beside bubbling mash, the day's work already humming in your head. Tomorrow there'll be more ferment to tend, more jars to seal, more stories to pass. But tonight, you remember how trade can carry more than grain and bacteria. It can carry a civilization's hidden wisdom, one jar at a time. You wake to something odd. Drums, yes, but not the usual Nubian rhythm. There's a new stiffness in the air, a scent of olive oil and unfamiliar spices. And armor, bronze gleaming in the morning light. Rome has arrived. The Roman Empire, in all its sprawling arrogance, has pushed into Nubian territory. They're not here just to conquer. They want grain, gold, and influence. But what they get, without quite meaning to, is beer. The soldiers come first, sunburnt, grumbling, skeptical of anything that doesn't come with olive oil and an official seal. They stare at the fermentation jars like they're alien artifacts. One younger recruit pokes the top of a jar with a stick and promptly sneezes. His commander sighs. And yet, after the first sips, the mood shifts. They're used to wheat beers, spiced wines, maybe some rough barley mash in gall. But this Nubian sorghum brew is different. Earthy, sour, functional, especially the medicinal batch, the one with the extra funk. The one they keep behind the reed screen, where the Nubians say, "Not for celebration, for healing." The centurion with a bruised leg limps in with doubt and leaves with a grin. Historians still argue whether this cultural exchange was mutual or coerced. Was beer shared in goodwill, or was it appropriated, swallowed down with a pat on the back and no credit given? The surviving scrolls don't say, but bones don't lie. And decades later, analysis shows those same glowing tetracycline lines in the skeletons of Roman soldiers who died on Nubian soil. You're invited to help with a brewing session in the Roman camp. It's a hybrid setup now. Some Nubian clay jars, some Roman amphorae, a stone platform that doubles as a seat for the camp's medicus. The brew? Nubian base with a few Roman additives. Rosemary, fennel, even a pinch of ground date. It's not bad, it's not better, but it's theirs now too. One Roman physician watches the mash bubbling and takes notes on a wax tablet. Curious fermentation, he mutters, trying to look unimpressed. But when no one is watching, he dunks a ladle in and sniffs deeply. Still, cultural tension lingers. Some Roman elites call the Nubian brew swamp beer. They wrinkle their noses at the earthy scent, preferring their imported wines. But in the back corners of marketplaces, people whisper about its healing powers, about the soldier whose infected arm stopped oozing after just 3 sips, about the old woman in Thebes who hasn't had a stomach infection in 10 years. And she swears by her daily cup. And then there are the hybrid taverns. You visit one on the edge of an outpost town. The sign is in 2 scripts, Meroitic and Latin. Inside you find mismatched stools, Roman oil lamps, Nubian wall hangings, and on every table beer jars with both seal types, Roman eagle and Nubian spiral. Here the drinks are poured with flair. Toasts are shouted in multiple languages, and at the back, a healer offers bandaged hands a ladle of something cloudy and strong. Not all is peaceful, of course. You overhear arguments about taxes on foreign grain, about Nubians refusing to sell, their sour medicine beer to certain Roman officers. Control breeds conflict, but fermentation keeps bubbling through it. One elder brewer tells you, "Let them argue. The beer knows what to do." She pats her clay jar and smiles. You watch a Roman scribe try to copy the beer recipe. He stares at a frothing jar, scratches his head, and mutters something about the temperature being completely unmeasurable. His notes are full of guesses. The brewer watching him doesn't interrupt. She just hums a song about acacia bark and timing your stir by the moon's position. Later that night, you visit a Nubian healer who keeps her own collection of Roman tools. Small bronze scalpels, tweezers, and a jar of dried herbs from Gaul. She tells you she likes the metalwork, but she trusts the beer more. Metal cuts. Beer seals, she says. You return to your mat and think about this blend of worlds. Rome came to dominate. But beer? Beer keeps choosing peace. You fall asleep with the memory of clay jars lined against a Roman wall, labeled in 2 languages. One word is medicine. The other? History. You wake to the gentle hum of a courtyard gathering, low voices, the rustle of robes, and something heavier than air moving between them. You've grown used to the beer jars, their earthy heft, the sour fermentation scent that lingers even after washing. But today feels different, not louder, just deeper. A warm clay bowl is pressed into your hands before you fully sat up. It's not the ceremonial festival beer. It's the smooth, mellow one used in everyday offerings, the one brewed with less froth, more patience. Sit, a woman says softly, her robes a blend of dusk and dust. We remember today. You do as you're told. The mat beneath you still holds heat from the afternoon sun, and across the space women settle around an open jar. One dips a ladle, and the hush ripples outward like a breath. This isn't a feast. It's something more private, more sacred. A child, maybe 5, sips from her cup with 2 hands. No one stops her. Elders drink too, slowly, meditatively. This is communal medicine, yes, but it's also emotional medicine. Grief floats here, just under the surface. You feel it in the slow tilt of heads, the way no one makes eye contact too directly. A woman to your left murmurs something you don't catch, but the tone carries a soft ache. Her son. Someone whispers. Gone last winter. The beer here is both salve and silence. This, it turns out, is more than ritual. It's therapy. It's community care. It's a midwife's remedy and a mourner's balm all in one. The beer nourishes, but also listens. It offers space without demand. And here, among these women, you understand the true heart of Nubian brewing. It isn't just fermentation, it's communion. Historians still argue whether this kind of gathering was part of codified healing rituals or informal family practice. But honestly, it doesn't matter. You can feel it. The room tells you what texts can't. A midwife passes you a scroll, not to read, just to hold. The paper is soft, thickened from years of use. Inside it are recipes, some medicinal, some poetic. We write our own, she says, not boastfully but simply. So we remember what works. You spot a line that reads, stronger if left beside the mother overnight. A note about the mash, or the memory. A small brazier smolders in the corner, scenting the air with bitter wood and crushed herbs. Maybe fenugreek, maybe something rarer. You can't quite tell, but the way it blends with the beer's natural sharpness is grounding. Nearby, a young woman stifles a laugh after sipping. Too bitter, she says, wrinkling her nose. Her friend nudges her with a fan. You'll appreciate it after your second child, she says, with the dry wit of someone who's, definitely been there. You're surprised at how much space exists for emotion in this world. And not just softness, frustration, humor, sorrow, all of it welcomed, soaked into the straw mats as freely as spilled brew. It's not the medicine that's hidden, it's the feelings, until they're poured out here. You wonder how many ancient clinics looked like this. Low-roofed, mat-lined, laughter cracked down the middle by tears. A beer passed hand to hand without prescription, but with knowing. At the edge of the gathering, someone sings, quiet, almost to herself. You barely catch the words, but the melody fits. Meandering, soft-footed, like river current over stone. You've seen healers offer bitter batches to soothe fevers, but this is different. This is a healing of invisible things, tiredness, ache, loss, fear. And the beer helps because it carries not just yeast or microbes, it carries memory. Historians still argue whether this kind of beer sharing was social bonding or medicinal administration. You now believe it's both, and more. The afternoon fades, but no one rises. Time feels flat here, not frozen, just gently paused. You sip again, now understanding the stillness isn't absence, it's presence. Deep, unwavering presence. And you feel it settle into your own bones like warmth. You aren't just visiting anymore. You're participating. Your breath, You're listening? Your quiet nod is part of the medicine now, too. Dawn's quiet touch finds you nestled beside a steaming jug of sorghum beer. You stretch and blink, realizing this isn't just any morning, it's a household efficiency test. You follow a mother into her compact courtyard kitchen, where a line of children wait patiently with bowls and small clay cups. It's breakfast time. Sorghum porridge with a swirl of beer isn't indulgence here, it's nourishment. Flour, water, grain, and fermented liquid. A little buzz, a lot of calories, a whisper of antibiotic magic. The littlest one, no older than 5, grips her mother's hand and receives a thick spoonful. She blows, tasting it, then drinks. No hesitation, no fear. Just breakfast, just life. You sip from your own bowl. The porridge feels solid. The beer, surprisingly smooth. It settles in your gut like slow-moving comfort, a creamy rush of sugar and grain. You realize this childlike acceptance is normal. Here, children are raised with beer. It's not drunkenness, it's daily sustenance, medicine by necessity. And it works. This morning ritual makes you rethink kids these days. They aren't tipsy, just fueled. The elder mother nods, drawing stories from scraps of memory, maybe of her own childhood, where a morning brew meant healed coughs and calmer stomachs. Families, physicians, community, the line is blurred, and that matters. Historians still argue whether beer was purely dietary for children or medicinal by default. Some scholars claim it kept kids alive, others say it was normal, pastoral routine. But here, it feels essential. The difference between robust health and chronic weakness. You've tasted both in your mind. Only one truly sustains. You follow the mother to a low bench where midwives once stayed. Now it's breakfast central. Tablets have replaced open pots, but the bowls remain. Each child finishes and is told with a gentle tug to take the bowl outside and set it by the fermentation pit. A ritual, not chore. Return welcomed, bowls emptied, bellies full, day begun. Food and medicine are so familiar that no one remarks on it. It's just how life happens. No judgment, no labels. The jar is medicine, the bowl is sustenance, and the sip is both. Childhood is cushioned by grains and gentle fermentation, by communities who know that recovery can start at dawn. Later, an elder arrives with a scraped knee. A child offers her fresh porridge in return, comfort being repaid. The old woman pats the child's head and sips. They laugh together, knowing this old brew knows more than textbooks. You watch the cycle continue. Child, elder, caretaker, brewer, all held together by fermented truth. You wake to a strange hush. No pots simmering, no low hum of community exchange, no distant laughter. The brewing compound is quiet, eerily so. You tighten your robe and step outside into the pale morning glow to find the reason. A decree has been posted. A parchment nailed to a mudbrick wall, scrawled in bold script, and also in the Nubian script you've come to respect. Yes, beers were taxed and regulated, so are bans. Beer is verboten, no brewing, no sharing, heavy penalties. You follow a group of women gathering near the decree. They are whispering. Some look defiant, others frightened. A small boy sneaks jars under his robe as if smuggling treasure. A grandmother stares at the scroll, unfazed. You suspect she has her own copy sealed in her writing box? You learn the decree is from a higher power, perhaps Byzantine or a new regional governor, insisting that fermented beverages cause moral decay, upset order, and raise too many unauthorized gatherings. Yes, there's mention of health concerns, but you just had enough healing for a lifetime to mistrust such claims. You realize this is the first time in centuries that beer has faced an existential threat here. People didn't just cook grain, they cultivated community, health, memory, and now an outside voice has demanded silence. A group of women huddle. One says, eyes fierce, they want to ban our medicine. Another responds, then they ban our stories too. The tension tastes of citrus mash, not refreshing, visceral. You notice that jars are already being hidden, buried under loose earth, covered in woven blankets, concealed beneath false floors. Even the children are roped into it until further notice instructions say, bring me jars that aren't marked with the forbidden symbol. The jars themselves become talismans, proof that brewing was once not just allowed, but essential. The first year after the ban is awkward. Families feel empty pots in their stomachs and silence in the spaces where laughter once flowed. Illness creeps back, coughs, wounds, stomach aches. The grandmother who always drank a small cup midday now takes herb decoctions, but the gleam of vitality fades from her eyes. The boy with the festering wound 2 weeks ago still hasn't healed. The community feels the absence. Historians still argue whether ancient laws like this were motivated by religious prudery, colonial control, or early proto-public health concerns. Maybe banish the beer to promote order, or maybe to redirect resources. Some say they were early temperance movements. Others call it cultural erasure. You wonder, is it foolishness or hubris? Probably both, but the people have habits. Even without permission, they gather. A small salon meets at dusk in someone's courtyard. Voices are low, jars concealed by cloth. A woman coughs. Someone drips a ladle of still illicit brew. Quiet camaraderie hums. The defiance is gentle, like fermentation that won't give up. You sit on a mat. Listen. A woman recites a fragment of a poem you helped write. Healing. In clay once more, moonlit medicine we pour. Her voice is soft but steady. The jar is passed. You wait until she's watched before you sip. Not everywhere is rebellious. In a new temple built downriver, priests preach about soothing the spirit through purity, openly decrying beer as the root of disorder. Books are written, sermons preached. A priest cites out of context wine verses from ancient texts. Funny how they never quote, beer is life. But people keep brewing in whispers. You're convinced more has been banned than just beer, language, memory, community. But bans fail when they ban the familiar, the nourishing, the ancestral. You realize you're watching a fragile but powerful undercurrent. Months pass, winters, summers, even silenced. Brewing continues underground. The jars you helped wrap are passed to those in pain. A wounded merchant is secretly given a ladle. A mother drinks to restore strength after childbirth. The boy with the leg still struggles. His mother, furious at the decree, steals a jar. He drinks. This time, he heals. Word spreads. This is more than stubbornness. It's necessity. The ban weakens. Officials check the compound. They seize jars labeled for exports but overlook the hidden ones. They enforce taxes, harass singers, but decline to prosecute older women whose joints are relieved. One official takes a jar for his wife's illness and never prosecutes the brewer. He leaves her family alone. He keeps secret. Historians still argue how durable such bans could be. Some believe they terrify people enough to give up. Others say they catalyze underground resistance. In Nubia here, they did both. The final cracks appear when a lethal fever sweeps a neighboring village. No one prays for rain. They call for healing brew. A midwife crosses lines, handing out jars. You're there when they gather. The fever breaks within a night. That Sunday, the decree is barely remembered. The jars are uncorked again. The people rise. You sit by the fermentation pit. It hums. Soon, it will bubble again. Maybe this wouldn't be remembered as defiance, more like survival. A culture refusing erasure, accidentally medicinal though they were. You sip a draft of your old standby. It tastes of triumph. Dawn breaks soft and insistent. the courtyard still humming with recovery from last night's whisper brew gathering. The band may have loosened, but its echoes linger. Trust is fragile, you realize, just like foam on fresh beer. Today, you're tasked with cataloging the tools of the trade, the quiet heroes of Nubian brewing, the clay jars, the woven sieves, the wooden paddles, the reed seals, and yes, the humble ink and brush that marks and passes along memory. The pottery is first, weathered yet elegant. Each jar speaks, curved shoulders to cradle foam, narrow necks to keep flies out, and hand-scored symbols etched into their sides. You hold one lightly, marveling at how it's shaped by hands, homes, and healing. Inside, you see residue clinging, what modern scientists would call a microbial fingerprint. Without microscopes, they knew this stuff mattered. They treated clay as an extension of their craft, not just a container. Next come the sieves, mats made from split reeds. Some are patched, others brand new. They strain grain mash, but they also filter timing. A coarse mat means slower drip, more time for microbes to mingle. A finer one yields a clearer beer, less curative tang. They're tools, but they're choices. Indicators, decisions made in silence. You follow your guide to the paddles, wooden spoons that swirl thick mash. Each bears grooves, crusts, and dark stains. Her hand traces the grain patterns. "Feel," she says, holding the paddle to your palm. The wood vibrates with fermentation. It's alive. She taps a hollow echo of time. That echo is knowledge, passed down without sound or script. Now comes the reed seals, strips tightly wound, pressed into wet clay, sealed the jars from pests. Some are plain reeds, others are decorated with cloth scraps or bundles of fragrant herbs. You ask why. The brewer shrugs. Protection, aroma, identity. That's enough. Identity matters. A woven reed band could signify a family line, a healing batch, or a recipe passed from grandmother to granddaughter. Finally, the writing box comes into view, the lacquered beauty you've sketched 1,000 times. Inside are brushes, ink stones, folded scrolls. You open a folded parchment, bulging jar illustrations, ink stains from impatient scribbles, tiny characters labeling jars, healing, sweet, fever. It feels fragile and vibrant, like the jars themselves. Literacy here isn't just art. It's record, observations, memory made portable. You sit cross-legged on the mat and trace the drawings with your fingers. These records show intent. Someone was paying attention, making distinctions, evolving formulas. Not just tradition, but change. Responsive, intentional craft. Historians still argue about how formal these systems ever were. Individual veneration or systematic pharmaco-brewing? Maybe both. But you now see they used their senses, their hands, and their hearts to do what we applaud today. Long before labs or suffrage, they cataloged and recorded. They watched, wrote, adjusted. They made assumptions and tested batches. They refined strainers to coax more tang. They marked jars to note better outcomes. You gather the tools again. The paddle, the jar, the brush rest on a smooth reed mat. Light filters in through palm fronds, flickering across their surfaces. Together, they form a symphony of purpose. Words, wine, container, process, all parts of the same quiet revolution. Later, you help move the jars to storage, sliding them gently into earth-cooled pits. You seal them with wet clay and reed wraps. It's bedtime brewing, the quiet work before tomorrow's ritual. You stand, brush tucked behind your ear, paddle slung over your shoulder. You realize this. These tools aren't relics. They're vessels of wisdom. Ink and clay speak in parallel. One writes memory, the other embodies medicine. Both are needed. As the sun sets, you sit amidst them, feeling their weight, literal and intellectual. You've spent days learning by doing, by watching, by handling. Now the knowledge is in your calloused palm, in the rhythm of your stroke, in the hush of jars settling into cool pits. These tools, their whispers, their histories, are tools for healing, communication, resistance. They shaped a medicine, a community, a culture, and tonight you add your own mark, a small brush stroke near the base of a jar, a signature of your time, your story, carried forward, bedrock memory in clay and ink. By the firelight flickering off the courtyard walls, midwives and brewers gather around a low mat, their laughter mingling with the soft hiss of fermenting jars. Tonight's focus is birth, a transition already brimming with ceremony and community. You settle in beside a woman wearing a leather apron, her hands still sticky with mash. She smiles, wiping one hand on her robe. "This one," she says, nodding at a squat jar sealed with fenugreek and reed, "is for birthing." A hush falls, not uncomfortable but reverent, much like the pause before a newborn's cry. They open the jar quietly, and the aroma that escapes is nothing like the festival brew. It's richer, earthy, slightly spicy with a trace of sour bread. The women draw closer, breathing it in as if it carries presence. You barely recognize yourself in the cup they pass. Sky blue to the eye, thick enough to coat your throat. Your first sip tastes of warm soil, tender beginnings, and something you can't name finding its way through you. It's organic, connected, purposeful. It seems like this is less about cure and more about defense, preparation for creation. The midwife begins her story. She says this brew reduces pain, eases complications. It helps uterus close, aids breast milk. A woman in the back nods, a gentle wrinkle of trust deepening beside her eyes. She cradles a newborn. A year-old watches. The atmosphere folds in on itself. Life, hope, legacy. You wonder what modern medicine would say. Historians still argue whether beer was ever formally part of childbirth protocols or just folk-based resilience. But you don't argue with relief in a newborn's cry, with a mother's steady breath, or with a poem whispered into soft dusk, bubble and blessing, womb and word. One woman hums that poem and others pick it up, low tones weaving into a lullaby. They rock the baby. Light flickers in 1,000 hearts. The midwife gestures to the jar. "We share," she says. "This jar is shared between the mother and the village, so the whole birth is communal, not hidden." Later, the new mother stands. She presses her hand to the jar in thanks and gives you a nod. Then she steps away, breast milk already leaking onto her robe. You feel tears prickle. Not sorrow, but awe at how medicine looks here. How ritual, poetry, and microbiology swirl impossibly together. The jar is carefully sealed again, reserved for postpartum use. Its label, inked inside a small scroll, reads, "For soft return." A symbol of a womb and a reed fan sits beside the text. The calligraphy is delicate, certain. Someone else will read it one day and carry this understanding forward. You lean back. Night is complete. The stories and sips and lives continue. In the soft drum of community, every jar is a promise. A promise to begin and to protect. And you realize this isn't magic. It's lived wisdom, hands steeped in grain and ashes and breath. A kind of prenatal pharmacy shaped by memory and necessity. Long before textbooks existed, in that moment you know that brewing wasn't just an art, it was midwifery, it was hope, it was home. You wake to the low chants of temple priests drifting over the courtyard, a reminder that beer in Nubia wasn't just medicine, it was infrastructural. Today, you travel to the pyramids, but not to marvel at tombs. Instead, you're on a mission to explore, pint for labor. The practice of giving workers beer rations during large-scale public projects. These brew rations supported pyramid construction, and maybe not just for hydration or morale. You join a column of workers heading toward a stepped pyramid under construction. Sun-bleached sandstone gleams overhead, and sweat already beads across your skin. Each laborer is given a jug of beer, each one shaped like a small funerary urn. The foam spills over, cooling hands as much as spirits. But this brew is unique. Sturdy, grainy, barely sweet, with the medicinal funk that signals healing power. You sip, taste the tang of sour sorghum, the hum of streptomyces, still busy in your gut. The work begins. Heavy stone dragged across wooden sleds, jars set beside piles of blocks, beside tools, beside calls from overseers. If knees buckle, if cuts tear arms open, the jar is right there, leveling hydration and promoting healing with each sip. And, yes, this wasn't unique to Nubia. Ancient Egypt famously supplied beer to pyramid builders. But here in Nubia, they practically exported antibiotic beer through the labor force. Historians still argue whether this was paternalistic welfare or a way to keep workers alive longer and healthier for state projects. You climb slippery ramps built of packed earth and grit. A veteran laborer taps you on the shoulder, nods toward a small wound on your calf. It hasn't healed from yesterday's stumble. Maybe he knows. Without words, he holds out the jug. You nod and take a sip. Warm liquid coats the wound, and you sense a slight relief, a soft resistance in your flesh. Midday arrives. You rest under a papyrus shade, drink deep from the communal jar. Around you, talks drift from prayers to exhaustion to jokes about the scribe upstairs taking your rations. Someone wonders aloud, what is beer's price in souls? Laughter meets it with grit, since they all know funerary offerings are paid for in jugs like this. You look at the workers' bones buried under this site centuries later. X-ray analysis shows lines of tetracycline in their skeletons too, not just in elite mummies, but in builders, laborers, mothers, children. This antibiotic beer wasn't exclusive. It was a public health ritual embedded in labor. The invisible. Pharmacy flowed with every stone moved. When one man falls ill, shivering, fevered, another retrieves more brew and presses it into his palm. No physician arrives. No someone shouts for aloe. There's only the communal jar. Sometimes it's enough. The pyramid takes shape, rising above the earth. And every time a stone is placed, every time a wall is poured, there's a brew break. Medicine by sip and by sight. Historians still argue whether these collective rations led to meaningful public health advances, or if they simply made workers more efficient, more productive. But to stand here, feeling the weight of stones and sips, you know the answer lies somewhere between care and consequence. As the pyramid grows, so does the labor system. You wonder, is this state-sponsored antibiotic distribution? Before antibiotics were antibiotics? The sun sets orange behind the rising structure. You descend with the workers, your legs tired but your spirit steady. You walk home along the Nile. The jar now empty, but your bones richer for it. Another stone is set, and so is another dose of healing knowledge, buried not just in pyramids but in history's grainy folds. Certainly. Here's the expanded version of, you rise before dawn, the sky still tinted with indigo, when a soft voice beckons from beyond the wall. The temple summons you, not for labor, not for healing in the usual sense, but for something both older and more enigmatic, a sacred rite, something whispered about in yesterday's gatherings, the brewing of God's memory. You tread through the courtyard in quiet sandals, feet skimming dust. Ahead, a shrine emerges, low-roofed, earth-toned, and almost humming with stillness. It's not empty, though. Inside waits a different kind of physician. Robed priests with stained palms, faces dappled with candlelight, and jars already steaming with the morning's first sacred mash. These priests aren't healers in the marketplace sense, but make no mistake, they understand pain, emotional, physical, spiritual. They chant slowly as you enter. Incense coils upward in curls of sandalwood and dried fenugreek. No one speaks above a hush. You take your place, kneeling beside a low tray filled with lotus petals and 3 shallow vessels. The brew arrives in silence. It's poured not from jar to cup, but ladled in slow spirals, first for the gods, then for the witnesses, then for the needy. You're handed the 3rd vessel. Warmth seeps into your fingers before it touches your lips. And when it does, the taste is different, sharper than the healing beer from the courtyard, deeper than the festival batch. There's citrus here, but also bitterness, intended, cultivated. You're not drinking this to soothe the tongue. You're drinking it to remind the soul, to stir memory. A priest touches your shoulder and begins to recite, the beer of light for dark places, the beer of closing for open wounds, the beer of return when walking away is too much. Your breath catches. You're not sure if it's the verse or the brew itself, but either way, you feel your pulse shift. It's not adrenaline, it's presence. You learn that this is the shrine's own recipe, passed down for generations, not always the same, never fully recorded. Some days it includes myrrh, others, barley that sprouted on an eclipse. The ingredients shift, but the purpose remains, healing by honoring, not forgetting pain, but recognizing it, drinking with it, saying, you were here, I survived you. Historians still argue whether these shrine brews were literal medicines or metaphorical offerings. Some call them ritualized placebos. Others insist they were antibiotic-laden treatments wrapped in spiritual ceremony. The truth, as always, seems to float in the middle. You see it firsthand when a woman enters, clutching a piece of cloth soaked in blood. A small gash along her forearm, fresh from a goat's horn. No screams, just resolve. A priest beckons her to kneel. She sips. He dips his hand in warm beer and presses it gently to her skin. No herbs, no chants now. Just the brew, doing its quiet microbial work beneath belief. You ask later if the ritual works for everything. A young acolyte laughs, kindly, not cruelly. Not for everything, she says. Just the important things. Loss, hope, recovery, grief, cuts and bruises, yes, but also heartbreak, loneliness, the inescapable silence after someone stops. Coming home. You wonder if this too is antibiotic in its own right, not because of the streptomyces in the grains, but because people believe it and belief shapes the body, or maybe the bacteria and the belief hold hands, fermentation and faith in perfect cohabitation. By midday, the room changes, jars sealed, petals swept, ash cooled, but one vessel remains, set on a woven mat, untouched. For the ancestors, the head priest says, always one for them. You ask if the ancestors drink it. He smiles. They brewed first. Of course they drink. You like the thought. Generations sipping through time, passing knowledge not just in recipes or scrolls, but in bubbles and rituals and quiet evenings like this. And suddenly the ceremony doesn't feel ancient. It feels alive, present, yours. Later you walk the outer perimeter, tracing the low wall where thousands before you walked. Names are etched into soft stone, not all legible, but enough to sense continuity. Someone brewed this same beer before you. Someone healed here. Someone forgave someone else under this exact tree. One priest joins you carrying the last ladle of beer. He says it's customary for guests to take a sip outside, at the edge of the wind, where words leave us. You sip. It's cooler now. The sourness feels mellowed. You hand back the cup, unsure what to say. You'll remember, he says simply. That's what it's for. Historians still debate whether temple brews were distinct from household ones, or if it was merely the setting that made them divine. Maybe so. But today, you witnessed something sacred not because it was untouchable, but because it was shared. You returned to your quarters filled with more than liquid. You've carried part of a living medicine, not bottled, not prescribed, shared, and, as night falls, you feel no pain, only presence, a body that remembers healing. You wake not to noise or ceremony this time, but to the hum of a small circular group gathered beneath palm shadows. Today's lesson takes you from ancient memory to modern practice, a bridge built of grain, bacteria, and quiet questions. The setting is the community brewing house, but today's focus is reinvention. Modern craft brewers meeting with Nubian families. A rough-hewn table holds jars of sorghum and barley, lapping mouth first into small tasting cups. On one side sits an energetic brewer from a nearby town, carrying stainless steel tools and modern etiquette. On the other, elder Nubian women whose names you've learned like blessings, Asha, Meret, and Tayet. They greet each other with soft smiles and head nods that feel heavier than words. The brewer pours them a sample of her latest wheat IPA hybrid and leans forward. "It's crisp," she says, "but sterile compared to yours." Laughter ripples, and Asha nods. Tayet takes a cup of Nubian sorghum brew and lifts it to her nose. She breathes in slowly, closes her eyes, and finally says, "It speaks." The day unfolds in dialogue. The modern brewer shows equipment, grain mills, temperature-controlled fermenters, precise measurements. The Nubian women respond with ritual, hand-stirring, moon-timed brewing, clay-coated jars left in shade. One table holds a printed chart. Another holds a soft, stained scroll. Here is measured science. There is oral science. Historians still argue whether heritage recipes are static, relics, or living adaptive systems. Today, you see both. The brewer adjusts her mash, guided by dye used in modern labs. Anecdotes become data points. Yet when she asks about the yellow fuzz, "Is it mold?" Meret laughs and replies, "It's our medicine, not your mold." It's a line that tugs at the boundary between lab and life. By afternoon, they brew, side by side. One group taps a thermometer, the other taps inscribed jars. The brewer invites them to tag quadrants in her ferments, marking time and smell across days. The Nubian women take notes in folded paper scrolls, comparing phenology by moon and by odor. Their labels call the batch Lotus Moon Healing Brew. The modern chart calls it Batch 19S. Later, a social moment. Everyone sips each other's brews. The modern IPA tastes clinical now. The sorghum brew tastes rich, heritage situated. You feel the emotional gag of legacy in each swallow. Asha points out the IPA lacks the subtle microbial complexity of traditional batches. The brewer nods thoughtfully. As the sun dips, the brewer pulls out a small bag of freeze-dried Streptomyces culture, her way of bridging worlds. Tayet takes a tiny pinch. She sprinkles it into a jar, then dips her finger and tastes, then smiles. Historians still debate whether revival or appropriation marks these agreements. Today, you see collaboration. The brewer duplicates a jar. The Nubian women name it Children's First. The brewer adds measurements. They all taste, again together. Night falls. The brew cools under stars. Every jar glows, echoing centuries of practice and hope. You realize that ancient antibiotic innovation hasn't been lost. It's just evolving, with science catching up to tradition. When you leave the brewing house, you carry no scroll, no jar, only a tiny vial of the Lotus batch. It's heavier than it looks. You've witnessed the echo of antibiotic beer reaching forward, and how collaboration can transform preservation into revival. Your bones feel warm. You wake to a low breeze stirring the courtyard mats, and a sense that tonight is different. It's not about history now. It's about here and now. about bringing everything full circle. The fermentation pits bubble gently behind you. The jars hum their familiar song, and across the fragrant courtyard under lantern light, the community assembles one last time. Old brewers, modern brewers, children, temple priests, laborers, and you. Tonight is the final toast. The entire life of Lady Murasaki and her pillow book meets the obscure legacy of antibiotic beer, unexpected guests, humble jars, layered cultures, whispered truths. The tray arrives, an arrangement of 3 jars: household brew, birth brew, and shrine brew, lined up like witnesses to a story told over centuries. Each jar bears reeds, clay seals, and handwritten scroll tags with faded script. Tonight they're opened. The air embraces you with a familiar complexity: sour grain, sweet soil, lingering incense, echoes of lullabies and labor songs. You inhale, deeply, tasting every echo of the threads you've traced: domestic, spiritual, medicinal, communal. You follow as the midwife pours the birth brew into a small ceramic bowl. A mother bearing a newborn is guided forward. The brew is shared, sip by sip. The child latches, life renews. You think of Lady Murasaki leaning over her writing box, swirling brush, seeking beginnings in words. This brew carries beginnings, too. This newborn's breath shaped partly by bacteria, partly by tradition. Next, the shrine brew is poured at an altar stone. A temple priest raises his voice in chant. Offerings are placed: jars, petals, reed seals. The brew is sprinkled over the stone base and slowly consumed. The chanting weaves ancient hieroglyphs, prayers for healing, wizardry for memory. You sip. The foam glitters on your lips like moonlight. You feel the weight of lineage, belief, the hush of centuries. Finally, the household tasting. You take the ladle. As you sip, you sense all the moments you've lived here: the morning porridge with children, the pyramid labor, the defiance under ban, the essay of jars and brushes, the academic mingling, the playful collaboration with modern brewers. You savor the last drops of a medicine that persisted through empire, occupation, suppression, revival. This juice is memory distilled. One by one, voices rise, young and old, to share a healed wound, a newborn, a protected temple. Their words don't disrupt the rhythm. They enhance it. Children laugh, hands clasp. You close your eyes. You taste gratitude, resilience, and the echo of Lady Murasaki's gentle wisdom: to remember is to live again. Your host stands and raises a jar toward the lanterns. To memory, she says, to healing, to tomorrow. You raise your own, your final sip warm against the cool night. The bacteria swirl in your gut, living testimony. You imagine microbes carried like secrets into dreams, into marrow, into distant futures. The voices fade, leaving only the breath of night. The soft click of lids being replaced and the low hum of fermentation settling beneath the stars. Your gaze drifts upward to the small lanterns strung among palm fronds, a constellation borrowed from heaven, carrying the last jars. Gilded glow. Inhale deeply. Warm earth, faint lotus incense, the lingering tang of received medicine, and the more subtle memory of human touch, of shared ceremony, of jars passed hand to hand through centuries you couldn't have named as a child. Here, sensations reach beyond story. They settle into you, like the final brush stroke of Lady Murasaki's poem, a simple, resonant note that lingers in the heart. You feel your body exhale, your pulse slow, your bones humming with soft contentment. You remember the woman stirring, mash, the boy healing from fever, the Roman trader nodding in surprise. You remember each sip, first taste of healing, first tone of ritual, first step toward reclamation, learning how tradition can ask for nothing and give so much. Let your fingers rest against the woven mat. Let your mind open to the soothing crackle of distant voices. What you drank tonight isn't just fermented grain. It's the pulse of a culture that treated everyday life and deep medicine as one. It's bacteria and belief working side by side, not like adversaries, but as collaborators in survival. Gentle, generous, unassuming. Now release your breath. Let go of analysis. Let go of questions. You don't need to know the science or the lineage. You just need this echo. The echo of a jar opened, a shared sip, a promise kept across time. Somewhere inside you, something shifts. The night is soft. The lanterns are gold. Your heartbeat steadies. Allow yourself to drift, not because your eyes close, but because your soul remembers. In this quiet space, you carry more than memory. You carry belonging. End of script. Sweet dreams.